Hello everyone and welcome back to another math video. In this video, we are going to talk about how to solve absolute value equations. So when we talk about absolute value is really the distance away from zero. So when I look at something like the absolute value of -3, we're going to use those bars to denote absolute value. And we're really asking how far is that number away from zero? So if we're thinking about a number line, here's 0, here's -3. Well, that distance is going to be 3. So we're going to always get a positive there. So same thing if we're looking at a positive number like 4. If I want the absolute value of 4, I'm asking how far away from 0 is that number here? And it's going to be 4. So it's 4 units away from 0. So if I wanted to show that in my picture, here's the number 4. And you can see that that's 4 units away from 0. So when we talk about solving absolute value equations, we're going to see something written like this. And we're going to ask, what numbers can x be so that I get a 3 out when I look at the absolute value? So I'm looking at the absolute value of x minus 2, and that's equal to 3. So with an absolute value equation, we have to think about what this could be. So the stuff in here could end up being a positive 3, or the stuff in here could end up being a -3, and then when I take the absolute value, I would get a positive. So what happens is we have to create two different equations for that, where x minus 2, this output could be a positive 3, or where this output, x minus 2, could be a -3. So when we talk about our steps to solve, we're going to have to think about solving two different equations. And then we're going to add 2 to both sides. Remember that equals is your wall. So we're going to get 5 in this case. And then when I add 2 to both sides here, I'm going to get -1. And if we plug in -1, you see how that absolute value is going to be a -3. And then when I take the absolute value of -3, I'll get that positive 3, so it works. And then when I plug in the 5, I get the absolute value of 5 minus 2, which is the absolute value of 3, which is 3, so it works. So we typically end up with two solutions for these. But I want you to notice the absolute value is by itself. So if we're talking about steps to solve something like this, that's your first step, is to isolate the absolute value. And then once you isolate the absolute value, your second step is to create two problems. Okay, notice when I create the two problems, I do not have the absolute value anymore. You're going to create one where it's going to be equal to the positive and one where it's equal to the negative. And then you're going to solve each problem. So let's look at an example. So if I look at this one, I have the absolute value of x plus 4 is equal to 1. Okay, absolute values by itself. So that's step 1 of isolating is done. Now I'm going to create two different problems. I'm going to say x plus 4 has to be equal to positive 9, or x plus 4 has to be equal to -9. And then I'm going to solve each of these problems. So to solve, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. That's going to zero out my 4. So I'm going to get 9 minus 4, which is 5. So there's one solution. And then same thing here, I'm going to subtract 4. So I'm going to get x equals -9 minus 4, which is -13. So we're going to end up with two answers. One is 5 and one is -13. Let's look at example 2. So this is where you may want to pause the video, try it, come back and check your answer. So again, the absolute value is isolated, so we're going to create two problems. 2x minus 3 is equal to 11, and then 2x minus 3 is equal to negative 11. To solve, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So now I'm going to have 2x is equal to 14, and then we're going to divide by 2. So x is equal to 7. On the other one, 2x minus 3 equals negative 11. I'm going to start by adding 3 to both sides. So I'm going to have 2x equals minus 8 divided by 2, and x is equal to negative 4. So we end up with two answers. Okay, in example 3, notice the absolute value is not isolated, so we have to do some work to get to this point. We cannot create two equations yet. You have to isolate the absolute value. So if I want to get this by itself, remember we're talking about peeling layers off. I'm going to start by moving that plus 2. The opposite of adding 2 is subtracting 2. What I do to one side of the equals, I got to do to the other side. Remember, math is always fair. So I'm subtracting 2, and that's going to zero that out. So we're left with 3 times the absolute value of x minus 5, and that's going to be equal to 12. And then now I've got to move that 3. Got to peel that layer off. So I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. So now I have absolute value x minus 5, and that's equal to 4. Since I've got the absolute value by itself, now I'm at a place where I can create two problems. So I'm going to have x minus 5 equals 4, and x minus 5 equals negative 4. Remember, you're going to use a positive 4 and a negative 4. To both of them, I'm going to add 5. That's going to zero the 5 out. So one answer is going to be x is equal to 9. The other answer is going to be x is equal to a positive 1. So this is where you may want to pause the video, try a couple more, come back, and check your answer. So if I were to look at A, I have the absolute value of x minus 6 is equal to 10. Absolute values by itself, I can go ahead and create two problems. So I have x minus 6 is equal to 10. X minus 6 is equal to negative 10. In both cases, I have to move the 6 to the other side. I'm going to do that by adding. That zeroes out the 6. So I'm going to get x is equal to 16. And I'm going to get x is equal to negative 4. It's going to take a little bit more work. We have 2 times the absolute value of 3x plus 1. And then minus 5 is equal to 9. So we've got to get the absolute value by itself first. So we're going to start by adding 5 to both sides. 2 times the absolute value of 3x plus 1. And that's going to be equal to 14. Now we're going to divide by 2 on both sides. That's going to get the absolute value by itself. So we have the absolute value of 3x plus 1, and that's equal to 7. This is where we would create two equations. We have 3x plus 1 equals 7. 3x plus 1 equals negative 7. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So we have 3x is equal to 6. And then 3x is equal to negative 8. And then we're going to divide everything by 3. So we're going to get x is equal to 2, and we're going to get x is equal to negative 8/3. So there's our two answers. And more thing we need to talk about is how do we know if we have no solution? I'm going to go back to my notes section up here. No solution can happen, and it happens when that absolute value is equal to a negative number. Okay? That's always going to give you a no solution. For example, let's say we have absolute value of 2x minus 1, and that's equal to negative 7. If I'm taking the absolute value, that's always going to be a positive number or 0, so it can never be negative. So what the no solution means is that there's no value for x that would make this a true statement.